Seems the chill has crept in with our rain, but that's okay. You can sit around and hear some great stories while we pass the time. Welcome to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get started and see what sort of spine-tingling tales we can share today. We've all got a favorite TV show from our childhood. I was always partial to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles myself, but that might show my age a little bit. But some of our programming from when we were younger definitely doesn't age well, skews a little more towards the horror quadrant. So let's have a look at some lost media while we explore Children of Men. I pulled up in front of the shop and had to recheck my directions. It was a dingy little hole-in-the-wall place between a Dollar General and a computer repair shop. It looked like it had just existed here since the creation of the first VHS tape. The windows were covered in thick yellow paper, and the outside was caked with a film of old dirt. The sign on the door read "Open," but it was barely visible through the dirty windows. There was no way this place was what I wanted. When I was a kid, I remember watching a show called Children of Man. As a kid, the premise of the show appealed to me. The show was all about kids living on an island in the Pacific, trying to survive day-to-day trials. The producers had gotten about 40 kids from all over America, ages 10 to 12, and dropped them off with supplies and instructions on how to survive. The host, Chris Mansworth, was a survival expert, and he would create challenges every day for the kids to complete. There were 4 teams of 10 kids, and the winner of each challenge got something cool for their area of the village. I watched the show religiously as a kid. Every Saturday night, right after The Simpsons, the show would come on, and I would be enthralled. I always imagined that I was on the island with them, surviving day to day. The challenges were really neat, too. They had kids gut and clean their own meat, dig wells by hand, build rafts for raft races, and make aqueducts so their village could have running water. It was a neat idea, but after 8 episodes, the show just kind of stopped. No new episodes came out, and the station never gave a reason. This was before the internet, so there was no way to check on updates online. So the show slipped off into obscurity, and my 10-year-old self just kind of forgot about it. I remembered the show again a few years ago, when Mom sent me a box of stuff from the attic. There were a couple of old VHS tapes in there, and between Batman, the animated series, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, were 8 tapes with handwritten labels that read Children of Men. We had a VHS recorder when I was a kid, and I can remember recording my favorite shows to watch later. I was excited to get to see the old show again, the memories flooding back as I started looking for the VHS player amongst the tapes in the box. There wasn't one, but a quick trip to Goodwill and $15, and I had a gently used VCR hooked up to my TV. I watched all 8 episodes back to back and fell in love with the show all over again. I remembered the kids I liked. Robert and Catherine were my favorites, but many of the kids had also been given a lot of screen time, and it was hard not to like them too. As I watched, I found myself wanting to see how the show ended over and over again. As I watched the show, I began to notice something a little darker under the surface too, something I hadn't noticed as a kid. The village was divided into 4 teams: green snakes, blue birds, red foxes, and brown mice. The teams had been divided up by background mostly, and it seemed very divisive to me as an adult. The green snakes did most of the hunting for the village, a lot of their kids having a rural background, while the brown mice did most of the farming and gathering because they came from a farm background. The red foxes were in charge of construction and upkeep. They were the smart kids, and they worked with the bluebirds who were in charge of food management and cooking the meals. Every team had a representative who sat on a council. Robert was for the green snakes, Catherine for the bluebirds, Marco for the red foxes, and Shireen for the brown mice. As the show went on, it became very apparent that Robert didn't trust Marco, and with good reason. Marco and Shireen had formed a kind of alliance on their own, most of it because Marco bullied her into doing what he wanted. Robert and Catherine set up their own alliance, and Robert started holding out food to sway Shireen's decision. The village needed food, and Robert pointed out that he and Catherine were the ones providing it. Robert and Shireen wanted a fair split for everyone, but Marco tried to split them into class systems that would put his foxes at a higher tier. Robert didn't like that, and it became very clear that if Chris hadn't been there, there would have been a lot more fighting. Robert was a big 12-year-old, a stocky bruiser who won battles with his fists most of the time, and Chris had to separate him and Marco on more than one occasion. Marco was smaller, but definitely had charisma. He had most of the mice and all of the foxes on his side, and I wasn't sure how I missed all of this tension as a kid. It all came to a head on episode 6. Marco was caught hoarding food in the Red Fox village. It wasn't just food that the other teams had been bringing in either. He had been taking the comfort foods from the canteen the brown mice ran for the village and storing them in his hut. Robert discovered this and took Marco prisoner, demanding that he be placed on trial. The whole village was in an uproar, but Marco agreed to be confined to a central cabin until the council could rule on his trial. Chris was setting the whole trial up as an episode 8 for the viewers. At the end of episode 8, the council found Marco guilty, and the episode was ended with a lot of shaky camera work and the Red Foxes storming the podium where Marco was seated. That was how the show had ended. The little bell chimed overhead as I stepped into the tiny place. The store looked like a throwback. Sharp-looking rickety shelves that were covered in plastic VHS boxes and dust. The shelves held VHS tapes, Betamax, and DVD cases that were arranged neatly amongst the filth and dust. A quick look showed that they were all arranged alphabetically, like an ancient library of some sort. The shelves fronted onto a glass display case that held murky wonders within. On the counter was a TV, an ashtray stacked with old butts, and a greasy store clerk who smiled at me as I approached. "You the one who called about the tape?" he asked, showing a mouthful of stained teeth as he smiled. I had searched for months on my own. I had taken to the internet in an attempt to find something, anything that would give me some closure. Wikipedia told me that only 8 episodes were aired, but that 12 had been intended. I dug deeper and began to see that the show was a mystery all its own. The list of children that had been on the show was woefully incomplete. Marco and Robert were there, so were Catherine and Shannon, and Chris was there as the host, but none of the other children were named. No one except Chris Mansworth had gone on to do anything after the show, and his only contribution was his death a few months later. His Wikipedia said that he had committed suicide in his hotel room, and foul play was not suspected. As for the last 4 episodes of Children of Man, however, there was no mention. So I took to the usual online sleuths, Reddit, 4chan, TV message boards, but no one seemed to have the answer. Most people had never even heard of Children of Man, and the ones that had were more interested in my copies than the last 4 episodes. Apparently the episodes were never compiled or released for purchase, and the only means by which you could still see them were on VHS tapes like mine. I had several offers for them. One guy wanted to give me $500 per tape, but I declined and told him I'd post copies of the tapes for free if they wanted. That's how I met Charleston Hammer 462. He was a user on the hometown board of Reddit. He saw my post and the posted videos and got in contact with me about the place I was currently in. Heard you were looking for a certain tape. In my line of work, when you're looking for something, you go talk to Reggie. He owns a shop in Burlington, South Carolina called Video Time Capsule. If you need a banned episode of a 70s drama or a never-aired documentary from the 60s, you talk to Reggie. I read the message a few times before responding. Thanks, Charleston, but these episodes aren't just unaired. They're unknown. No one has ever seen them. I don't even know if they exist. And the store you're talking about is 400 miles away. When I hit send on the message, I figured I'd never hear from him again. It took him an hour to respond, but he got back with me. What you're after is very rare. I used to watch Children of Man myself when I was younger. It ended so abruptly that it's been an internet mystery since the net was just message boards and wells. I didn't learn about the last 4 episodes, though, until I met Reggie at TVCon. We got to talking about old TV shows, and after a few drinks, he told me he had the last 4 episodes of Children of Men. I perked up. Have you seen them? That response took a little longer. I have. It's some pretty different stuff. I won't ruin it for you, but if you value the way you remember the show, don't watch it. There's a reason these episodes never made it to air. Here's the number to the store. If it's late, call him anyway. Reggie keeps weird hours, and sometimes that store's open 24 hours a day. He's an eccentric dude, don't doubt, but he has what you're looking for. The number was at the bottom of the message. Yeah, I said, no longer quite sure what I was doing here. Yeah, I called about the complete series of Children of Men. He nodded, reached under the counter, and slapped a plain white case onto it. All 8 episodes, recorded as aired, he said, studying me. I frowned. I'm after the last 4 episodes. His piggy eyes glinted behind the grease-smeared glasses. There were only 8 episodes aired. And you told me you had the other 4 that never aired. He smiled, and it did ghastly things to his porcine face. Had to make sure. Come to the back. And with that, he disappeared behind the curtain into the back room. I walked around, hesitating for a moment as I touched the curtain, and followed him. I'd come 400 miles, might as well go 5 feet into hell. The phone rang 6 times. I was just about to hang up when someone answered and spoke through a mouthful of food. I didn't understand him, but once he'd swallowed whatever he'd had in his mouth, he tried again. Video time capsule, where your memories are always on sale. What a tagline. Yes, I'm looking for something specific. The sound of something being stuffed into the speaker's mouth and chewed loudly assaulted my ears as he continued. Aren't they all? What you looking for? Clearly, customer service was not his strong suit. Episodes 9 through 12 of Children of Man. I heard something hit the floor, and the speaker cursed loudly. Yeah, you must be mistaken. There are only 8 episodes of Children of Man. Look, I said a little hotly, I was told that you have things that no one else does. I want to see those episodes. I don't even want to buy them. I was just told that you have them in your possession. Is there any way that I can just... $500, the voice returned, and the tone was not to be bargained with. In cash, before I will even let you see them. I agreed, despite the outrageous price, and now I was here in the grungy shop, preparing to go into the back. The back was worse than the front. DVDs and VHS tapes were stacked into teetering piles. The back room was lit by only a few dingy overheads, and I could see an old TV casting its glow from the back. The floor was riddled with trash, and I swear you could hear the mice scampering around to get out of my way. What sort of videos could you find in here? Would this place give me anything but heartbreak? This seemed like the setup for 1,000 scary stories, and I suddenly didn't want to see these mysterious artifacts. But like anyone else who comes to find things that they want, I needed to see them. Reggie was waiting by the TV. He had an ancient set that looked very similar to the one my parents had owned. On top of it was a VHS DVD combo player that had a set of rabbit ears stuck out of it like a weather vane. There was a wooden chair in front of it with a little blue pad on it. Reggie held up a hand. $500, he said. I reached into my pocket, but I paused. How do I know it's authentic? Look, I could get into a lot of trouble for even owning this, okay? You think guys who possess child porn go to prison for a long time? This would put me under the prison for life. If you want to see those episodes, then I need the money. Are we doing business or what? I handed him the money, and he popped the cassette tape in and walked away. Not joining me, I asked. Not for another $500, kid. I heard the curtains rustle, and the show began. Episode 9 gave us a recap of the trial, and then the storming of the stage. When the show started, I noticed a distinct lapse in the film quality. Whoever was operating the camera was just shorter than the usual crew members, and they seemed barely able to lift the heavy rig. Finally, the camera had Robert in frame, and he began to fill us in on what was happening in the village. It's been about 3 days since Marco's trial and his escape. Since then, Fox Village has been separated from our village. They took most of the brown mice with them, and now they're trying to raid us every night for food. Something's going on over there. We heard shouts this morning, and... At that point, the shouts got louder, and Robert ran off screen as the camera tried to follow him. We came to the edge of Red Fox Village. Many of the huts that were once on the verge had been burnt out, making a kind of barricade between them and the rest of the village. Many voices were cheering as something swung from the tree. At first, I thought it was just an effigy, a dummy maybe, but then suddenly I realized it was Shireen. She hung like a grotesque wind chime in the space between the villages, and Robert shouted for Marco to stop being a coward and come out. Some of the kids were crying, but everyone on the other side cheered and shouted, "Traitor!" or "Faithless!" at the swinging body of Shireen. I sat glued to the TV, unsure if any of this was even real. It was night when the next recording resumed. It seemed that whoever was running the camera wanted us to see a raid. The night vision on the camera showed kids with torches fighting other kids who were leaving their storehouse in a hurry. The kids with torches hacked at them with machetes, blood flying as they connected, and some of them dropped as they were stabbed or hacked to pieces by the blades of the other children. The rest of the episode was mostly uneventful. Lots of shaky cam, lots of crying, and at one point someone dropped it and didn't pick it up again for several minutes. As the episode ended, I was left looking at my own stark face looking back at me. What had I just watched? There was no way this could be the same show. Things had gone very Lord of the Flies in the village, and as the 10th episode started, I wasn't sure what to expect. Episode 10 started without preamble. There was no recap, no theme music, and the footage looked unedited. We see a much more professional camera crew, and Chris Mansworth trying to bring some order back to the island. They're coming up through the shallows, Chris and about 10 adults, coming up in the dark towards the village. Chris was talking about how it had all gotten so out of hand, and how he was going to try to rescue the kids. As they came into the seemingly empty village, Chris cupped his hands and began to shout at the empty huts. He told them that the game was over, and that it was time they went home. He told them that there was a boat that would take them home, but there was still no response. He moved deeper into the collection of straw huts, the fires burning low around him, and that was when they struck. Kids with spears, kids with machetes, came screaming out of the darkness, and the cameramen backpedaled furiously as the adults were completely taken by surprise. Blood flew, legs were sawed off as pint-sized pygmies, hacked and chopped, and Chris Mansworth was buried under a pile of children as he screamed and flailed. As the cameraman tripped and went down, we see the shadow of a child standing over him as the spear comes down as well. The episode ended very abruptly. I was speechless. What the hell had happened to them? These were kids that had been doing challenges and making friends. The rivalry between Robert and Marco had always been the most serious part of the show, but now they had devolved into savagery. The 11th episode was about 10 minutes long. It opened on a stationary camera shot of the same space where they had held the trial. Marco was on his knees before the camera, and he looked bad. His left eye was a puffy mass of bruised tissue. His left ear was a bleeding stump. His nose looked to be cut jaggedly. He was weeping silently, and his tears were thick and bloody. Robert stood behind him. He had always worn a white football jersey in every episode I'd seen him in, but the garment was stained red and brown now. He bled from several places on his chest, and when he raised his machete, it was with obvious pain. This morning, before the sun had risen, this dog attempted to attack our village. He violated the rules of war as agreed upon by he and I. We agreed to a battle between our two villages at dawn. This snake tried to attack us in the night and lost. Thus his village is forfeit. As the winner, I sentence him to death. Please, Robert, Mansworth said, his voice off screen. The show's over. We can all go home now, back to your parents. It doesn't have to end like this. As Marco cried his terrible tears, Robert looked at Chris off screen and turned back to his enemy. The show is over. This is our home now. He brought the machete down. Marco cried out and fell face first onto the ground. Robert fell on him, hitting him with the machete again and again. Blood sprayed from the struggling child, and when Robert looked back at the camera, his face was spattered with gore. He reached out, and the camera went off abruptly. The last episode was only a few minutes. It started with a shaky cam journey through the jungle. The runner was being pursued. I could hear the footsteps behind him. As the runner got to the shore, he jumped onto something and pushed it into the water. The wooden deck of a boat came into view, and as he drifted out, I could hear oars working in the water. He sat the camera on the seat as he rowed, and the faces of children could be seen in the surrounding jungle. Then, everything went dark. The tape clicked, and the TV went back to static. I left it in the VCR and stumbled out of the back room. Reggie was sitting behind the counter and looked up at me with something like sympathy. He held something back towards me, and I saw it was my money. I shook my head and stepped away from him. I had bought a ticket, and I had paid the price. "You okay?" "Yeah. So, what happened to the kids? They just left them there?" Reggie shrugged. "Coast Guard picked up Mansworth about 2 days later. He was drifting in the ocean and looked extremely rattled. He wouldn't tell them how he had gotten out there or where he had been. When he got back, he gave the tapes to the studio, and the next time anyone saw him, he was dead." And the kids? Studio never pursued the show, never sold the aired episodes. They never even tried to air what Chris had brought back. They just made the whole thing disappear. I suppose there's an island out there full of kids who wanted to be on a TV show and just never came back. Their parents were likely told there had been an accident or something. The whole thing was hushed up, and eventually people forgot. You'll forget one day, too, he added, as though he thought it might help. As I lay in bed now, trying to forget the horrible things I saw, I hope I do forget, but I doubt I ever will. So if you ever find an island out in the Pacific, maybe one full of locals that look just a little not right, turn your boat back out of sight. Those natives are not friendly. I think I can hear some thunder on the horizon. When I was a kid, they used to tell you to count the seconds between the flash and the boom, and that's how you could tell how far the storm was. I always wondered if there was any truth to that. Who knows? It's a fact that children sometimes play strange games. Some of them are games we played as well, but some of them are games so clandestine, games so mystical that our adult minds can't quite comprehend. So, who's to say a couple of kids might not be indulging in a little bit of fortune-telling, a little bit of future reading? Well, what these children find in their future is anything but bright. So let's explore what happens when we run afoul of a chatterbox. She died very suddenly, though none of us could have known what lay inside her. Her name was Kimmy Wynn, and she was from Korea or Singapore, somewhere like that. We never learned much about Kimmy. Her family didn't speak very good English, though, but Kimmy spoke it well enough to understand the lessons. We tried to befriend her, but Kimmy was shy, and I'm ashamed to say that we took to bullying her. We were in elementary school and extremely cliquey. Kimmy was an outsider. She wore strange clothes. She didn't speak like we did, and we made fun of her for it. Most days, she just sat in the back of class, sat on the pavilion at recess, and said little to nothing. When she died, it surprised everyone. Kimmy lived in a small apartment complex in a not-so-great part of town. Her family worked for her uncle, Mr. June, who owned a market in the neighborhood they lived in. Kimmy had been working there after school, helping her parents pay the bills, and she'd been making a delivery on her bike when someone had abducted her. They found her bike just sitting on the curb, wheels spinning slowly, and the police didn't seem hopeful in their investigations. Her kidnapping was all the buzz around school, and my friends wanted to talk about little else. Marissa, our sort of leader, said she bet that Kimmy had just made the whole thing up so that people would be friends with her after she was found. Leanna said that she shouldn't say things like that, but you could tell she didn't really feel very scandalized. She said she'd be praying for her, praying that they'd find her safe, but even at 10, I doubted it. I kept my mouth shut on the matter, personally thinking it was terrible. No one should just be grabbed off their bike as they tried to help their family. A week later, they found her body in an empty lot near her uncle's shop. Mom wouldn't let me watch the news report about it, but Marissa said that the newsman had said that she was chopped into little pieces and left there. The news thinks it might have been something to do with her uncle, but they don't seem to know much about it. A service was held for her at the local Korean Baptist church, and I saw a picture of her parents lighting a little paper boat and floating it out for her. Her two sisters, one of whom was in the first grade, were there too, and I remember thinking how awful it would be to lose someone like that. My own sister wasn't very nice, but I still didn't want anything like that to happen to her. A few days later, Miss Hurd stopped me as I was going out to recess and asked if I would put the stuff from Kimmy's desk into a box. Her parents are coming at the end of the day, and I really need to be outside with the other children. Just put it on my desk and come outside when you're done. I saw the pack of Marlboros in her hand and guessed that child-minding probably wasn't the only thing on her mind. Marissa stayed to help me, and I found that Kimmy's desk was surprisingly neat. My desk looked like a garage sale, but Kimmy's desk was very organized, and it was easy to pack her stuff away. Marissa cooed over her Hello Kitty pencil box, but I reminded her that we weren't allowed to take her stuff. The pencil box, her notebooks, her folders, and a cute little art supply case went into the box too, along with a Hello Kitty eraser and a pencil set. Marissa looked over it all greedily, but I wasn't trying to get in trouble for taking anything from a dead student, especially not when the teacher had trusted me to pack it. We were loading some of her notebooks when a small purple book fell out of the middle of them. Marissa pounced on it before I could even fully register what it was. I told her to give it back, that it didn't belong to her, but Marissa was already opening it and leafing through it. "Oh, no way! It's her journal! Give it, Marissa. It isn't yours. We need to put it in the box before someone sees it." "No way. No one knows about it, so who's gonna miss it? Unless..." Marissa got a mean look on her face. "You're gonna tattle on me." I stopped complaining then and let her slide the journal into her pocket. Marissa and I had been friends since first grade, but I hadn't forgotten how mean she could be either. She had bullied me in kindergarten for the better part of the first half of the year, until I'd come to school with a brand new backpack one day, and she had fallen in love with it. Marissa had said someone with a backpack that cool had to be friends with her and Leanna, and I had been part of their clique ever since. That had only been 3 years ago, though, and I wasn't in a big hurry to go back to the way things had been. Marissa and I were friends, but Marissa could be mean when she wanted to be. I won't tattle," I said softly, more to myself than to her. "Good," she said, snatching the pencil case out before I could get the lid on. I set the box on the desk, and I made sure that Marissa was out of the classroom before I left. I didn't want her doubling back to grab anything else out of there. The idea to make the chatterbox was Marissa's, as so many other bad ideas usually were. She read the journal to us at recess, taking delight every time she or Leanna were mentioned. My name came up a few times, though it was usually by association. It appeared that Kimmy had been keeping a journal of people and how they had wronged her, as well as how they had wronged others. Quite the little spider was Kimmy, hiding away and listening to people as they gossiped or went about their lives. Marissa said, getting a mischievous look. "I've got an idea." She turned to the back and tore out an unused page, beginning to write the predictions for her chatterbox. If you're unfamiliar with the item, it's probably because it has a million names. I've heard them called fortune tellers, whirlybirds, paku-paku, salt sellers, cootie catchers, and any number of other things. Sometimes when I post about them online, I get little fights started over what they're called. People have 1,000 different names for them, but they seem to be something known worldwide. They are little devices that you put numbers in, picking numbers randomly until you get your fortunes and learn your fate. Marissa had already started writing the same old things she always wrote on the wedges anytime she made one of these. They were never very creative, usually things like you'd marry a millionaire, that you'd be a princess, that you'd have 20 children, that sort of thing. She was always very predictable, but she never seemed to include anything bad in her predictions. Marissa, despite being a bit of a brat, didn't like for bad things to happen to her or her friends. When she made the chatterbox, it was always the best outcomes. "Okay, pick a number." I looked at the chatterbox questioningly. What are you doing? Isn't it obvious? If Kimmy knew so many secrets, then maybe she won't mind telling us our future." The idea of using a dead girl's paper to tell our fortunes made me shudder, and I shook my head as she turned to Leanna. "Come on, Lee, let me tell your future." I guess it couldn't hurt," Leanna said. 5. Marissa opened and closed the device very fast, before holding out for her to pick another number. 7, she said, smiling a little as the paper creature plopped open and closed very quickly. 3, she finished, and Marissa opened the flap. "You should tell Jana what you..." But Marissa stopped suddenly. She seemed to realize that she had read words before she had quite put together what they had said. "Tell Jana what?" Leanna said, smiling but looking a little nervous. Marissa looked at me. Did you write something on this while I wasn't looking?" "No. When would I have had a chance?" Marissa started to call me a liar, but she huffed out a "hey" as Leanna took the chatterbox and looked at the tab. She looked confused when she got the chatterbox away from her, but she looked angry after she read what was on the tab. "You should tell Jana what you did to Mark at the lake." She tossed the little paper thing in Marissa's lap. "I told you that in confidence. I only kissed him because you said that I should." "Lee, I didn't write that." But Leanna was already storming away, heading for the picnic tables. Marissa looked back at me, holding the paper craft out as though inviting me to take my turn. I I don't really want to do it. It feels kind of creepy. Oh my God, Marissa groaned, deep in her throat. Here, I'll do it. She picked numbers at random, moving her fingers very quickly as she selected her fortune. Marissa looked mad, furious even, but that didn't seem to stop her from selecting numbers and finding out what her fortune might be. The fortune that Leanna had read had shocked her, and she was interested in finding the ones that she had written so she could feel okay again. It was a fluke, she must be thinking, and now she was going to prove it. She opened tab number 3, and I could see her hands shaking as she read it. Felicia doesn't like you. She pretended to, because her mom asked her to. She looked at me suspiciously, but I just put my hands up and looked at the words inside. It's not even either of our handwritings. Your handwriting is swoopy, and mine is super sloppy. This handwriting is way too neat to be either of ours. Marissa looked at the handwriting, and then flipped open the journal as if looking for the source of it. She stared at a few of the pages before slamming the book shut and taking the chatterbox with her. I asked her where she was going, but she didn't answer. Turns out she was going on a tour of the playground. I didn't realize what was going on until a group of angry kids approached the playground monitor with a frantic Marissa in tow. The lead girl, Felicia Spaulding, looked livid, and Marissa was trying to tell her how sorry she was with every step she took. Miss Conway, Marissa's telling lies about my friends and me. Miss Conway, a broad, beefy, grandmotherly woman with hands like slabs of meat, looked at Marissa and then back to Felicia. What's going on, girls? What's this about lies? I didn't write it, Marissa wailed, waving the chatterbox with her free hand. She wrote lies about us in her chatterbox. Her box said that my mom had gotten an abortion and that Cindy was adopted. Cindy, the tall girl with the wavy brown hair that hung with Felicia in her clique, was crying and shaking her head. Other kids had similar stories. Some said that her chatterbox had told them that their parents were getting divorced. Others said that it had said it knew things that they had done or things they had said. One of them even claimed that it told him that his aunt would die later that week and that she was in the hospital with cancer. Marissa, hand that thing over, Miss Conway said, her face growing dour as she listened to the long list of complaints against Marissa. Marissa gave her the folded paper, both hesitant and loath to be rid of it, and she almost cried out in anguish as Miss Conway tore it into pieces. Next time I hear of something like this, I'll give you after-school detention. Stop writing lies about people, and the rest of you go play. They all dispersed, Marissa looking down at the pieces of the chatterbox as they drifted in the wind. I hadn't walked up with the rest, but I was still close enough to hear Felicia tell her not to expect to go to any of her parties anymore. Marissa changed after that, and it seemed to me that the chatterbox was the reason for it. For the rest of the day, she just sat at her desk and looked down at her lap. I couldn't see what she was fiddling with at first, but eventually I saw it was another one of the chatterboxes. I was shocked. Hadn't she learned her lesson after the first one? Her book was open, but her hands moved below the lip of the desk in a rapid series of jerks and swoops. She would flick it once, twice, 3 times before opening the corresponding flap and reading what it said. Every answer seemed to make her more and more agitated. She would take it off her hands sometimes and seemed on the verge of ripping it to shreds before gently sliding it back on and starting again. Marissa, would you care to answer number 4 for us? Miss Hurd asked, drawing my attention back to the front of the class and drawing Marissa out of her stupor. Marissa shoved the chatterbox under her desk and looked down at her open textbook as she searched for number 4. 17? Miss Hurd blinked. That would be correct if we were still on our math lesson. We've moved on to geography. Are you feeling well, Marissa? You don't seem like yourself today. Marissa turned beet red, digging through her desk to find her book. Miss Hurd had approached her desk, I suppose wanting to see if she might be feverish, and when she stooped to pick something up, I saw that the chatterbox had tumbled out of her desk as Marissa looked for her book. Oh, what have we here? I remember these from when I was a little girl. We used to use them to tell each other's fortunes. I can't believe kids still make these for... But as she had been talking, she had opened one of the flaps on the chatterbox. She glanced at the tab as it came fully open, and her words ended as abruptly as they had begun. Marissa looked up at her as her geography book came open, and the look on her face was enough to tell me that she didn't like what she saw there. "Get up," Miss Hurd whispered, her voice barely containing her rage. Miss Hurd?" Marissa asked, unsure what was happening. "Get your," she curbed her next words, "things and come with me. We're going straight to the principal's office, young lady." Marissa looked up, confused, but collected her things and went with Miss Hurd to the office. She never came back to class, and when I asked Miss Hurd, she only told me that her mother had been called after something she had written in the chatterbox. Marissa was suspended for 5 days. She was taken out of class and put in another 4th grade class, away from Leanna and I. Leanna said it served her right for writing lies about people. She made her bed, and now she has to sleep in it. I would have honestly forgiven her, but not after what she said about Miss Hurd. I asked her what she had said, and Leanna leaned in like it was some big secret. "I heard that she had written that Miss Hurd was cheating on her husband with Mr. Sizemore." "The PE teacher? Yeah, can you imagine? She's lucky she didn't get expelled." When Marissa came back to school, she was a very different girl. She looked frazzled, her red hair looking unkempt. She seemed to be constantly pulling at her clothes. She was nervous and twitchy, and she seemed obsessed with the little chatterbox. She would ask people to pick a space, ask them to make a choice, but most people would just walk past her without speaking. It's tough to be labeled a social pariah at 10 years old. She had lost all of her friends, except for me, and I wasn't even sure I still wanted to be her friend. When I saw her at recess that day, sitting by the fence and fiddling with the chatterbox, I sat beside her and asked if she was okay. I could smell a smell around her, and it wasn't an altogether healthy smell. "I can't let her beat me," she whispered, her face very close to the chatterbox as she worked the mechanism. "Who?" I asked. "Kimmy," she said, just as low, and when she opened the fold on the chatterbox, she sobbed and closed it again before starting. "Mara, Kimmy's dead," I said, using her nickname to try to bring her back to her senses. "Not all the way dead," she said, and when she opened the tab this time, her fingers crumpled the space, and I could read the message written there just before she closed it. "Your mother thinks you're crazy." Marissa pushed me suddenly, and the fence scratched my back as I slid sideways. Through the tears that welled in my eyes, I could see her lunatic's face as she pushed it inches from mine. "That's not your fortune. Don't read other people's fortunes." Miss Conway must have seen something, because she started walking over. I got up and walked away quickly, not looking at Marissa as the playground monitor approached her. That was the last time I spoke to Marissa, but not the last time I saw her. For the next 3 months, I saw her on and off. She became like a wraith who haunted the school. She stopped asking people to look at the chatterbox. She just sat off by herself and played with it, cringing and sobbing every time she opened a flap. The more I saw her, the worse I felt for her, and eventually I decided to try and bury the hatchet. I decided that after school I would go visit her at home and try to see if we could reconcile. I also wanted to see if there was any sanity left in her to save. She hadn't been at school the last couple of days, not that anyone but me had bothered to notice. When I arrived at her house, her mother seemed happy to see me. She told me that Marissa had been feeling poorly lately, and that maybe a friend might cheer her up. Marissa's mother looked like she hadn't slept in a few days, and even at 10, I noticed that she approached Marissa's room like there might be a wild animal behind the door. She knocked, slow and hesitant, and told Marissa that I was here to see her. Marissa said nothing. She knocked again, asking if Marissa was awake. Marissa said nothing. Her mother opened the door slowly, and I could see Marissa sitting at the desk with her back to the door. She never moved when her mother walked over to her, and as I stood in the doorway, I couldn't help but take in what appeared to be the lair of a crazy person. Some of the details would come to me afterward, but many of them were seen in the split second that we often use to see details and assess if a person is a threat or not. The floor was full of chatterboxes, like a flower bed of folded paper, and her mother seemed to be stepping over them gingerly. The outside of them were covered with words, all of them written in that neat, spidery handwriting. The writing on the wall was all Marissa's, though. She had written on the wall in anything she could find. The scrawls were a messy jumble of pen, pencil, paint, charcoal, and even rusty red colors that might have been her own blood in a few places. The words were strange, not making a lot of sense. She watches. She whispers. She tells me I'm crazy. I'm insane. I'm a disappointment. She haunts me. Most chilling of all was the rusty red smear of the word Kimmy over the head of her bed, like she had traced it with a bleeding finger. When her mother started to scream, I was turned away from the bloody words as if someone had slapped me. She was screaming Marissa's name again and again, shaking the ragged scarecrow that she had become. She begged me to dial 911, and I ran downstairs to do just that. The paramedics couldn't figure it out. They said it was like her heart had just stopped, and no amount of CPR or defibrillation could bring her back. As they laid her out on the ground, I could see her face frozen in a rictus of fear and shock. Looking to the desk, I saw the chatterbox she had been toting around. It was grimy, covered in fingerprints, but I believe to this day that it was the same one that Miss Conway had destroyed all those weeks ago. The open flap was blank, the surface stark and unmarred. I can't imagine what she could have read there, and I honestly didn't want to find out. I'm in high school now. 8 years have passed, but I still remember the lesson I learned from Marissa. It's unwise to mess around with the possessions of the dead. Their things are better left undisturbed, their memories left unread. It was the last lesson Marissa would ever learn, and she learned it too late. If it's a lesson I ever forget, I have a reminder on my desk every day. You see, when I came home from Marissa's funeral, the chatterbox was sitting on my doorstep. I can't prove it was the same one. I know that it can't be the same one, but that didn't stop me from scooping it up and putting it in my pocket before my mother could see it. I heard it whisper to me that night. Its whispering is little more than a mutter as I sit here writing. It's harder to hear, but it never goes away. That's why I refuse to touch it, let alone use it. Let Marissa and Kimmy keep each other company inside that thing for the rest of time, for all I care. I don't want the knowledge they hold that badly. I think I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Listening to rain hit the roof really puts me in mind for a nap. But, I suppose if I start snoring during the next story, you can always just poke me awake. There are those among us, not pointing any fingers, that find the idea of using the bathroom in public to be a truly terrifying venture. If that's you, then I'd recommend you give this story a pass. Otherwise, you might just get caught with your pants down. I've worked construction since dropping out of high school, so about 20 years. I know most people don't think much of it, but if you haven't shivered in the night lately, then thank a construction worker, because we probably built the thing that's keeping the elements out. It's not glamorous work, but I've managed to claw my way up the ranks till I've got my own crew, run my own job sites, and live pretty comfortably. After 20 years, I've noticed that there are constants in this industry, but only 3 standouts: hard hats, lunch pails, and porta-johns. Job sites and porta-johns go together like, well, hand in glove. They're always necessary, always terrible to get stuck in for long periods of time, and always seem to smell both sterile and like a horse manure field. In 20 years, I've been inside more porta-johns than I have women, and unfortunately, I think some of them were cleaner. This particular time was a little different. A lot different. And it's something that sticks with me to this day. It's been weeks, months even, and I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat as I see that thing and hear it grind its teeth together. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. We were working on these new apartments, one of those big old buildings with about 8 units per floor and about 15 floors that are wedged between one another. One that's mostly the same thing. I was sipping my 5th cup of coffee when I heard the ominous rumble from my guts and knew what was coming. I'd had 2 breakfast burritos from Dolly's. She's an angel, but she goes heavy on the pepper. A whole pot of coffee, a hash brown as big as a pretzel, and now it was all coming to a head. The guy showing me the blueprints for the building looked at me with real worry and asked if I needed to take a minute. I told him I was fine, but he got about halfway through telling me about a problem with the wiring when it happened again. I gritted my teeth. That one might as well have been a starting pistol, and I told him I'd be right back. I made it to the lift just before the doors closed, and the guy who was taking it down looked worried as my stomach growled like a V8 with a bad carburetor. "Too many Dolly's spicy chorizos, boss?" he said, and I nodded as the sweat started to stand out. "It's fighting with the pot of coffee and the hash brown in there, and it's anybody's bet who's gonna win. Remind me not to follow you into the John," he said with a laugh as the lift came to the ground floor. I was out and looking for one of the blue boxes that marked our porta potties. There were about 5 of them on the site, and wasn't long before I found one over by the office. I was waddling now, trying not to lose it right here in the yard, and the guys were laughing as I came ponderously towards my oasis in the desert. I closed the door, pushed the black locking bar into place, and had my pants down and my ass over the hole before I could embarrass myself any further. I checked for paper and was glad to find some, not always a given, and as the pressure began to relieve itself in the worst possible way, I closed my eyes and sighed happily. I'll save you the messy details, but needless to say, I was glad when it was finally over. I took out my phone, giving it some time to see if there was any more business to conduct. And that's when I became aware of the strange sound. First, I thought I might not be done, but I realized pretty quick that the slight splashing noise wasn't me. It was like something was making ripples in the water, splashing up a little as it stirred below, and I wondered if maybe I had dropped off a big enough payload to still be stirring in the tank. When it splashed again, this one high enough to wet my nethers with cold, dirty water, I stood up quickly. That had definitely been something alive splashing around in there, and I must have looked pretty silly just standing there, pants around ankles, as I stared into the hole. I fumbled at my phone, trying not to drop it in as well, and bent low so I could see into the fallow pit. It was hard to tell at first. The murky blue water looked like a subterranean lake more than anything, and the lighting inside wasn't helping matters in the least bit. I wondered if a snake had gotten in, maybe something bigger, and that was when I noticed something round coming out of the water. As it rose, I recognized it for what it was, the top of a very bald head. The tips of ears were sticking up from the surface of the muck, and as it rose I could see the beginnings of eyes as well. They were open, staring, utterly devoid of anything human. I stumbled back, nearly falling down as my feet tangled in my pants, and bumped hard against the door as the whole edifice shook on its base. What the hell was that, I wondered? Had some homeless guy gotten into our shitter? Had some freak gotten down there with nasty stuff on his mind? I didn't know, but what I did know was that I was locked in here with him. I reached for the lock, The light from my phone held forward so I could see, and when I heard a splash, I turned back in a hurry. The light from my phone fell across the opening, and the head that rose from it looked like some kind of creature from one of those old stories my friends and I had told to spook each other when we were young. Its skin was inky, though that could have had more to do with where he was residing. Its ears were long and pointed like a bat, and its eyes were white like a full moon. It rose from the festering swamp like a vampire from an old movie, its body simply rising without any mechanism to lift it. I wasn't sure if it was tall or capable of levitation or something, but its face came fully over the lip of the toilet lid. I saw the worst of it then. Its mouth was stretched into a perpetual grin, the teeth long and sharp as they fit together like puzzle pieces. As neatly as they came together, they still appeared to be too long for its mouth. They looked like they might be painful to it, the grin more of a grimace than anything. And they were gravel gray and slimy with something more viscous than saliva. In the dim light of the little toilet, it rose up to tower over me. It kept rising, its head nearly brushing the ceiling, and I could see that its arms and legs were indeed longer than expected. They were nearly twice as long as its body, the hands ending in cruel claws. It leered at me, reveling in my fear, and I was paralyzed by it. The creature was terrifying, but I don't think that was all of it. There's certain places where you seem to believe that there's an illusion of safety. Your home, your bed, your bathroom, places you're at your most vulnerable and comfortable. You think of these places as safe, like sanctuaries, and when these places are violated, it feels like a violation of your person. It opened its mouth, giving me a good look at those gravel gray fangs, and as it hissed softly, it leaned forward like it was getting ready to strike. I don't know how I did it. I shouldn't have been able to move at all, but my hand seemed to come up all on its own and flick the plastic bar back that was holding the door closed. I went from cowering on the floor of a filthy porta-potty to scrambling across the yard of the job site, the light flooding in as it sent the creature shrinking back into that dark hole. I had crab-walked about 20 feet when I realized that I hadn't had time to pull my pants up, and I was scrambling half naked across a job site with hundreds of people on it. I didn't think all of them were watching me, but that was way more eyes than I wanted there to be. I jerked my pants up, started yelling about some kind of animal being in the porta-potty. Some of the guys ran over to investigate. Others came to see if I was okay, but ultimately they didn't find nothing. I told the authorities when they got there too, that something had been in the tank, and it had come at me, spitting mad. They got somebody out there to drain it, but they didn't find nothing. I hadn't expected they would. Whatever it was, it had gone back to hiding in the muck. I had the unit closed down and told the vendor that he could come and get it. He offered to bring me a new one, but that didn't help. I do my business off-site now, but I'll remember that grinning, dripping, terrible face for as long as I live. Whew. If it gets any colder out there, this rain is going to turn into a snowstorm. Huh. Might have to add that to my list of ideas for future cozy horror. Though the thought of sitting inside and listening to snow is anything but cozy in this neck of the woods. Speaking of snow, there's always a chance that inclement weather might ruin your time out in the great outdoors. But if you should get stuck in the midst of inclement weather, let's hope you find an oasis in the mountains, like our next story. You might be a little hesitant, though, after listening, especially if you come across a cabin in the mountains. It began as a freak snowstorm. I've been hiking and camping in the woods outside of Kashmir since I was in high school. It was a spot I used to like to come to with my friends before they all got too busy to return to nature every now and again. The wilderness in North Georgia is just so beautiful. It's a great place to immerse yourself in nature and return to your roots. This weekend, however, I found myself at nature's mercy instead of its beauty. Well, maybe not nature. The longer I stay here, the more I suspect that something insidious might be in this place. When I set up my tent Friday afternoon, the temperature had been a little crisp, but nothing out of the ordinary. Spring has been in bloom, and it seemed unthinkable that it could get below 50 in the daytime. I had been meaning to hike deeper, coming back out again on Sunday, but when I woke up to find snow, I decided my weekend might be a bust. After gathering the gear I could find, I began hiking back to my truck, but I must have gotten turned around. As the day fretted out, I realized how lost I'd become. My usual landmarks were either covered in snow or changed so drastically that I didn't even recognize them. My compass was no help. The needle kept turning and turning, leading me in circles as I wandered through the snow. As I got more and more turned around, the night began to creep up on me. I was soon watching the sunset as I thought about whether or not to put up my tent or keep walking. And that was when I saw the light. It was small, like a candle on a windowsill. I'd never seen any houses out in the woods before, but it was possible that someone had built one in the 6 or 8 months since I had last been out here. I began heading in that direction, and as I did, I saw a cabin begin to materialize amidst the snow. A candle was burning on the windowsill, and as I approached, I began to look for signs of life. I saw no four-wheelers or any means of getting in and out. I was making sure to make a little noise, whistling and crunching loudly through the snow so as not to startle someone who might not want company. The cabin was not the sort of pre-made ones you sometimes saw in showrooms. It looked to have been made of sturdy trees, and the wood looked new and raw. Someone had built this recently, and it made me even more aware of whoever was inside. It was pretty likely that a gun lived there as well, and I was in no hurry to be a squib in the local paper. As I knocked on the door, I felt a little like Goldilocks trying to introduce myself to the three bears. I don't know what possessed me, but when no one answered, I tried the knob. It opened easily, and the door wasn't locked, so I stepped out of the snow to find a roaring fire in the grate of the one-bedroom cabin. It was humble. A bed, a table, a large bookshelf that seemed to stretch the length of one wall, some chairs, and the fireplace. It was so warm after having come out of the cold that I couldn't help myself. I stepped inside and made a beeline for the fireplace. I was careful not to track snow in, leaving my boots and pack on the front porch in the hopes that whoever lived there would recognize that I was here and not be startled. I don't know where the owner of the cabin was, but if they were out hunting in this weather, I wasn't likely to receive a warm welcome. Either way, I didn't think I had any options with the snow falling and the night fast approaching. I sat by the fire, and as the flames dried my clothes, I couldn't help but look at the huge bookshelf that stretched across the wall. It was floor to ceiling, and as big as it was, there was still space for more books. The books were numerous, about 30 in all, and their spines had the names of people instead of titles. My curiosity got the better of me, and I went and took the first one down. The name, Jeremy Blake, was printed in gold leaf on the spine, and when I opened it, it cracked in that satisfying way that old books do. The owner of the home probably wouldn't appreciate me perusing their bookshelf, but I figured I already had enough to apologize for. What was one more thing, right?
The inside was written in what appeared to be real ink, and the handwriting was delicate and practiced. Whoever Jeremy Blake had been, he'd been a very dab hand when it came to writing. I had assumed it was biographical, but the book didn't look old enough to have been written in 1736, as it claimed on the front cover. Jeremy talked about being out hunting deer with his brothers when they were suddenly set upon by a snowstorm. It had been snowing when they set out, but they now found themselves in a real blizzard. His brothers had left him when he couldn't keep up, and Jeremy thought he was about to die. That's when he saw the light out in the woods. He talked about coming upon the cabin, and how it had seemed so empty, but lived in. Like me, he had decided to thank the owner when he returned, and set about penning this in his journal, which he'd brought with him. I pray the snow passes quickly. I would love nothing more than to return to my father's home, so that I might chastise my brothers for leaving me in such a sorry state. The next entry, though, was a little bit different. Jeremy had woken up to find that no one had returned to the cabin, and the snow was still falling outside. He had thought it looked a little better, and now that he was warm, he thought he might try to make his way home again. Jeremy opened the door to leave, but upon stepping out, he'd walked right back into the cabin instead. He tried this several more times, but always found himself stepping back into the warm, inviting cabin. There was only one door. When he tried to break a window in his fervor, he found they would not break. He became a little bit upset, fearing that he had stumbled into some kind of deviltry. He tried to leap through the window and nearly knocked himself unconscious. He had destroyed the house, flipped over tables and thrown chairs, but none of them had broken. When he turned around, it had all resumed its previous position, and Jeremy was certain that he had found some sort of witch's den and was most afraid. The next few days were full of entries about Jeremy continuing to live inside the cabin and discovering what it was all about. He found that he didn't need to eat or drink, which was both a blessing and a curse. Despite not needing these things, he found that he was always hungry and constantly licking his lips when his mouth felt dry. He watched from the window as the snow began to melt, and as winter became spring, he watched the animals roam outside the cabin. After a while, his entries became a journal of what he'd seen from the cabin's windows, until I discovered the last entry in this long series of observations. I don't know if anyone will ever read this. I suppose it matters not. I've existed in this house for a long, long time. I cannot say how long, but I was not even 15 when I came in out of the cold, and now when I look at the glass over the fire, I see an old man staring back at me. I don't know how much longer I'll survive, but today I saw another person for the first time in a long time. I was looking out the window, watching the snow fall again, when a child came hesitantly from the tree line. He was looking at the small candle that had brought me here, but his eyes got big when he saw me looking back at him. He took a step towards the house, meaning to come inside or ask who I was, but I shooed him away. I think now that I should have let him open the door to see if I could escape, but I couldn't take the chance of that boy being stuck here as well. Better to die alone here than have some young fellow watch me pass. He scampered away when I banged on the glass and yelled at him. Probably for the best. I'm going to stop now. This journal does nothing but remind me that I'm alive. Maybe it would be better to be dead. I wasn't sure what to make of the journal. Was it real, or some make-believe story the owner had concocted? I looked at the bookcase and wondered if they were all like that. It was getting dark outside, so I took the second journal over to the fireplace so I could read it in the roaring light of the fire. A pine knot cracked as I got comfortable, and the whole experience was very rustic. The handwriting was a little rougher, not the same as the beautiful script of the previous one. Inside were the musings of a woodcutter. His writing was shorter, more surface level. He'd gotten lost while chopping wood and found the cabin on his way home. He stopped in to see who lived there and got himself trapped inside. just like the writer before him. He'd used his axe to try to break free, but to no avail. He'd taken up the book he found on the shelf and began writing to pass the time. Wasn't much, 3 or 4 pages before he stopped. He wrote about watching some squirrels, seeing a deer, and worrying that he would starve when he didn't find any food in the cabin. Whether he died or became bored, I don't know. He stopped writing about 5 pages in, signing Roland Wood at the bottom. The same name on the book spine, written in the same rough gold leaf that the words were written in. The next diary turned out to be a kind of fantasy story, something my grandpa would have called an oat opera. It talked about pioneers on the trail, one of them breaking off in the night to have a call of nature. He finds a strange cabin with a flickering candle, and once he went in, it refused to turn him loose. He spent a few pages talking about being trapped in the cabin, and when his sister came to look for him, he saw her and banged on the window to get her attention. She looked up, clearly startled, and ran away before she could help him. Whether she'd seen him or not, no one ever came to look for him. The rest of the journal was spent telling the story of the pioneers and what they must have seen on the trail. His sister seemed to be the main character, and he talked about the Indians they fought, the animals they hunted, and the things they survived on the way to their new home. Eventually she married a man, and the two lived on the prairie with their growing family on the outskirts of Preacher's Glen. Towards the end, he must have become a little jaded with the whole thing, and the story took a dark turn. His sister, her husband, and her children became riddled with hardships as the Indians descended upon their house, burning their crops and killing them all. The sister watched her family suffer for the crime of leaving her brother behind. The journal ended with her finally being allowed to die at the hands of her captors. He signed it William T. Pitt on the last page, and when I looked up from the story, I realized it was day again. As snow rattled loudly against the window, I had to wonder if it had only been a day. Jeremy's journal made it clear that the concept of time was a little wobbly. Had I been here a day, a week, a year? The snow was still blowing outside, but it didn't have to be the same storm that had brought me here. I looked at the door as I got up to put the book away, and wondered if I would find myself stepping right back into the cabin. I took a step towards the door, but I wasn't bold enough to try it yet. I needed more research first. With little else to do, I picked up the 4th journal. I noticed that William Pitt was on the spine of the 3rd one as I put it back, and Beverly Stryker was on the spine of the one I took down. It seemed that the cabin had finally attracted a female resident, and I was interested in getting her point of view on the whole situation. Beverly's story was a little different from the others. Miss Stryker was in trouble when she found the cabin. Beverly had been fleeing into the night to escape her abusive husband. She hadn't wanted to marry him. He was not the sort of man that women like to marry, but she had made the mistake of falling for him when she was young, not realizing what a brute he was until it was too late. By then, her father had decided that if his youngest daughter wanted to marry someone so far below her station, then he would let her. He had enough useless mouths to feed, useless mouths in need of dowries, and her husband had asked relatively little from him by way of a dowry. The two had been wed less than a year when Beverly had run away for the first time. He had found her easily enough. Her husband was a hunter, and her trail had been easy to follow. He had his farmhands tie her up in the barn and whipped her with a horsewhip he used on the colts when they were breaking them in. Her skin had been covered in welts, broken and red from the lashing, and Beverly had been left in the barn overnight to think about what she'd done. She thought all right, but it wasn't likely the reflection her husband had been thinking of. Beverly lay in the filthy hay all night, thinking about her current situation and planning her next escape attempt. She played the dutiful wife for the next 3 months, filling his cup, cooking his dinner, and keeping his house like he liked, until her husband grew lazy again. He stopped having the hands watch her so closely. He stopped locking the bolts every night so she couldn't escape. He stopped putting the dogs out every night so they would alert him when she left. Then one night, she ran, but not fast enough. He was after her sooner than she expected, and she had heard the bang of the dogs and the clump, clump, clump of the horses' hooves. She was running through the woods, the early autumn chill sending goosebumps up her skin. She hadn't gotten dressed in anything heavier than a shift. If he'd caught her getting dressed, he'd have known she meant to run. So now she ran in the light of the late-year moon, her body bathed in the golden light as she fled for her life. When she had fallen, she had expected to be ridden down out of hand, but the hooves and the dogs went past her as she lay curled in the boughs beneath a tree. The roots made a kind of cage, Beverly looking through the bars as she listened to insects and night birds singing their song. She expected to be found, expected to be caught, but as the night deepened, she found it was only her out in the wilderness. The dancing light had stolen her from her worries, and that was when she noticed the candle. Beverly found the cabin and had been trapped by the enticing cage. There wasn't much after that. She'd written a little more, but nothing as exciting as the night run through the forest. She read the journals and discovered that she couldn't leave, but there was none of the fear or uncertainty the others had shown. She was content in this place, a place her husband couldn't find. She lived inside the cabin, updating the journal sparingly and passing away with nothing to show for it, and no one the wiser. I looked at the door again, but the next book looked so inviting. Books became my food. I devoured them, reading some of them and taking their stories in. The cabin had attracted many in its lifetime, and I wondered how many more had chosen not to write. How many had suffered in silence here? How many had simply wasted away with nothing to mark their passing, except their memories? Those who had written had left behind everything, from pages and pages of observation to short little stories about nothing at all. They wrote fantasies, westerns, slice-of-life stories about the people they'd left behind, and it all became more and more modern as time went on. I don't know how long I sat there reading, but it was snowing again when I looked up to find a journal in my hand with my own name on it. I opened it and found the pages as white and blank as the landscape outside my window. The doorknob was cold when I wrapped my hand around it. The wind was cold as it blew snow in through the open door. My boots were still on the porch, but they looked old and weather-beaten. The backpack was gone, likely dragged off by some animal while I was reading. The boots had been tan when I bought them less than a year before I entered the cabin. Now they looked bleached, the fabric thin as a mummy's cheek. I wanted to reach out and touch them, to see if my fingers would go through the thin skin of the boots, but I knew I would never get close to them. I stepped out onto the porch and found my foot coming down on the hardwood floor of the cabin. I closed the door and went back to the fire, picking up the journal with my name on it. If you're reading this, then it's already too late. I don't know if this place is supernatural or just some old pocket out of time, but I do know that it's a trap. I don't know if there's any escape from this place, but I know that no one's coming to look for me. I hope my diary is the last, but I have no doubt there will be others. The house seems to draw us to it, collecting stories as it collects lives. At least I'll be warm before I die. I looked down at what I'd written, unsure of what else to say. It was barely a page, and the effort seemed lame. I was no writer. I'd never done more than emails or text messages. But as I struggled to find something to add to it, the futility of the exercise hit me all at once. If someone read it, they would be trapped anyway. My warning wouldn't help them, and my eyes slipped over to the fire as I thought about just burning it. Would it burn? I didn't know, but if the cabin wanted lives, then why give it what it wanted? Then I turned back to the door and thought of something a little different. An experiment might bear results. The book thumped onto the porch when I tossed it, and when I turned back to the bookshelf, it hadn't returned to its spot. The snow skittered across the pages, leaving wet runners on the paper as they marked them. They fluttered back and forth as the wind hit them, but the book was a little too heavy to be pushed by the wind. The snow seemed loath to come up on the porch, so I didn't think it would ruin it. When I closed the door, I hoped that someone would see it before they opened it. I had added a little bit at the end, and as I sat shivering by the fire, I hoped they would notice the book and follow the instructions before barging in. Knock 3 times and open the door. Under no circumstances come in. If the house is empty, run away as fast as you can. If I'm here, hopefully you can help me escape. One more story for you. I think the rain's starting to slack off, and as we all know, horror stories and the bright sunshine just aren't a good combination. We've all experienced a move once or twice in our life. I know I have. And with moves come strange circumstances, weird sounds in the house, or maybe a creaky foundation in the wind. But always be mindful of the supernatural, even in the newest of houses. You wouldn't want to hear the burbles from beyond.
We recently moved into our new house. It's perfect, just the right size for our family, but it has a strange problem with the drains. I noticed it while I was unpacking the bathroom things. I turned to discover that my husband hadn't flushed and pushed the lever to send it down the drain. When I did, I discovered that the sinks burble whenever you flush the toilet. Nothing too jarring, but it scared me a little when I first heard it. The sink burbled and bubbled, making a noise deep in the drain as it cleared the water. My husband laughed it off when I mentioned it to him. "It's an old house, dear. The pipes are on the central line that feeds into the septic tank. No one has used them in a while, so it's probably just getting used to people being here again." I blew it off as a weird thing the house did and just went about my business. A week later, the drain started burbling when I took a shower, too. I overlooked it, though, not wanting to dwell on something I ultimately couldn't do anything about. This was the first place I'd lived with a septic tank. I'd always used city water, and I figured it was just something that happened when you used a septic tank. My husband barely seemed to notice it, so I assumed it was nothing out of the ordinary. After a few weeks, I had almost come to ignore it, until the whispering started. I was brushing my teeth one night, running the water as I always did, when I heard the burbling coming from the drain again. I had bent my mouth to the stream to get a mouthful of water, when I could have sworn I heard a burbling kind of whisper coming from the drain. It was barely audible, more like a gurgle than a burble, but as I listened, it almost sounded like words. Black bank bees. Back bank bees. I turned off the water, spitting my mouth full of paste down the drain, and closed the door behind me. The burbling got worse from there on out. It didn't just bubble when the water was on. It always bubbled, loud and jarring, and I was still certain I could hear some kind of whispering. My husband just shrugged it off as normal. He was busy with work and didn't have time to indulge his flighty wife. I put up with it as best I could, but it was honestly starting to grate on my nerves a bit. I heard it in the kitchen, the living room, and especially whenever I had to go to the bathroom. The bathroom seemed to be the epicenter, and as the days progressed, I became more and more confident I could hear words amidst the gurgles. I lost my cool one night when my husband was working late. As I lay in bed, my son sleeping soundly next to me, I could hear the sink burbling and whispering from the hall bathroom. The bubbles were visible now when it burbled, deep green bubbles that sloshed up the drain and filled the sink with a stagnant water smell. Never when my husband was at home, of course, and the bastard didn't believe me when I showed him the thin film that hung on the bowl. As I lay there listening, the gurgling seemed to mock me. It seemed like only I could hear it, and the continued surge of tidal force had frazzled me. I was up before I knew what I was doing. I stomped down the hall in my pajamas, heading for the bathroom on bare feet. I was mad. I'd had enough of it, and I slammed the door open as I saw the towel rack shake ominously. I flipped on the lights like I was intending to catch the sink doing something wrong, and shouted loud enough to make my son stir and cry in his sleep. "Shut up! Shut up right now!" I screamed at the burbling sink. And, for a wonder, it did. The drain stopped burbling for a few seconds, and there was peace. Then a geyser erupted from the drain and splashed high enough to splatter the ceiling in a green fountain. It splattered the walls, pattered against the shower curtain, and caused the ceiling to rain drops of thick sludge. I'd fallen to my backside in the hallway, watching the geyser with wide eyes.
when I saw something gloop out of the drain that made me scream. I scuttled across the floor, my back hitting the bedroom door, hearing my son cry out from the bedroom. I had seen the last thing I would have expected from the narrow bathroom drain, and I was certain now that I could hear something else joining it as it gurgled onto the bathroom floor. A hand of sludgy, green liquid that had pushed its way up the drain like an angry hurricane. I reached with numb fingers for the knob, the fingers refusing to find purchase as I slapped at it uneasily. I heard a gurgling thunk then, the sound of water trying to maintain a shape it was unaccustomed to, and something cast a shadow against the door. The best way I can describe it is the shadow appeared to be cast by a living jello mold. It was solid, but not transparent. It cast a watery shadow, its form undulating as it came towards the door. A single green watery hand gripped the door frame. I screamed as it lumbered into the hallway, and my grasping hand felt like a dead fish. It was 6 feet tall, bulbous and amorphous, with a shuddering bald head. Its eyes were murky green coals, and its form was a wiggling mass of barely contained fluid. The fluid was awful. It had clearly drawn its matter from the septic tank, and the things floating within the water didn't bear thinking about. It took a single unsure step, the unstable golem shaking as it took another tottering step forward. My son was screaming now, unsure where I was, and his terror only amplified my fear. As it wobbled towards me, leaving puddles of oozing liquid on the floor, I heard the burbling voice again as it whisper-wailed its words. Beck, bank, bees. Beck, bank, bees. I tried again to open the door, my eyes locked in terror on this watery monstrosity. Beck, bank, bees. Beck, bank, bees. I felt my own water puddle on the floor as my bladder let go, the creature towering over me. Beck, bank, bees, it yelled. It leaned over me, and I could feel the stagnant drops fall onto my face. I wanted to cover my nose. It smelled like raw sewage, but I was too afraid to move. I was sure in that moment that I would never see my husband or my son again. He would return home to find me dead, maybe find our son dead too in his bed. He would see the water and always wonder what had happened to me. As this creature crouched over me, I was certain that the last thing I saw would be his terrible sewage form. It bent its watery lips to my face then, and when it whispered this time, I could hear something different. Check. Tank. Please. The words were spoken as though they might break the creature, and they were spoken with the utmost emphasis. His speech was slushy, slurry, as though his tongue was missing. He was approximating speech, but it was still difficult to make out. I looked into those green orbs and repeated back what he had said. Check, tank, please? It nodded its liquid head, its featureless face almost looking relieved. Then it melted into a deluge of stagnant water, and I was covered in buckets of disgusting sewage. My husband didn't believe me. I was still cleaning up sewage when he came home, and he was utterly flabbergasted. I told him about the creature, about its final message, but he refused to believe it. It was a dream, he said. The septic tank had backflowed into the house, and I had dreamed this watery creature. We went back and forth for hours, until finally I had the solution. Open up the septic tank, then. If there's nothing there, then I'll never say another word about it. I'll deal with the gurgles and the bubbles, and I'll never say another word about anything. After another hour of arguing, he finally relented. We called a service, and they breached the lid. It wasn't too hard. The earth was removed, and the lid was removed with a little backhoe. The smell was atrocious, but the men didn't seem to mind. My husband told them that we had a problem with the tank. It flowed into the house, and they figured the valve had been stuck. I saw the pumper hose descend, and the tank was emptied. My husband said I didn't need to be there for this, but I wanted to see. As the sewage went down, I saw the operator's eyes grow large. He called his partner over, and a flashlight was found. The flashlight nearly fell into the tank when it fell across the sewage-covered lump. His partner told us that it appeared to be something in the tank, but we shouldn't worry. The house has been empty for a while. It's probably just a congealed mass or something.
The operator continued to pump the tank, and as the water level fell, we saw that the lump was more than a congealed mass of waste. It was a body. The police were called. Our front yard was soon playing host to 3 squad cars, a fire truck, and an ambulance. The techs were shunted aside as the rescue team received the body from the septic tank and loaded the remains into a body bag for identification. The police asked us some questions, but had already cleared us for the most part, since the body appeared to have been there for months. The inspector had likely not breached the tank at all during the initial inspection, so the body could have been there for years if it had been sealed properly. As the bag was zipped, I got a momentary glance at him. It was large, the head bald and lumpy. It looked a little like the sewage form that had tottered over me in the hallway. Before they zipped it up, the desiccated creature's mouth lolled open, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His tongue was mangled. Since the incident, we've heard no more burbling. The septic tank hasn't sputtered, and the house has been quiet since that night. Other than the sounds of our family, of course. My husband still can't explain how I knew there was a body in the tank, but I'm just glad that there was ultimately a happy ending to the story. So next time you hear a burbling in your pipes, don't discount it as simple plumbing issues. Your house may be hearing burbles from beyond.
I think that'll just about do it today. But I do hope you'll come back and join us again for more cozy horror with your old pal, Dr. Plague. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful day and a spooky evening.